When 7-year-old Ethan Rodriguez heard his baby sister's muffled cries echoing through the floorboards of their small Riverside home, he thought she was having another nightmare. What he discovered in the basement that sweltering August evening would expose a horrifying secret that had been growing under his father's own roof for months. The desperate 911 call that followed didn't just save 18-month-old Sofia's life. It revealed how a trusted caregiver had been systematically tormenting the most vulnerable member of their family, turning what should have been a safe haven into a prison of fear and neglect. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Rodriguez house on Maple Street had always been filled with the sounds of life. Even after Maria Rodriguez passed away during Sofia's birth 18 months ago, leaving Miguel to raise 2 children alone, laughter still echoed through the modest ranch-style home. Miguel worked tirelessly at his auto repair shop, often staying late to fix one more engine or help a neighbor whose car had broken down. His dedication to providing for his children was unwavering, but it meant long hours away from home, hours that needed to be filled with trusted care for his precious daughter and the son who had become her fierce protector. Ethan Rodriguez possessed an unusual maturity for a 7-year-old, born from the necessity of being the man of the house when his father wasn't around. Every morning, he would carefully prepare Sofia's bottle, warming it to the perfect temperature and testing it on his wrist, just like he'd seen his father do. He knew exactly how she liked her toast, cut into tiny squares, how to make her giggle with peekaboo games, and which lullaby would calm her when she was fussy. The responsibility never felt burdensome to Ethan. Rather, it felt like an honor. Sofia was his baby sister, his responsibility, his world. The neighborhood around Maple Street was a tapestry of hard-working families where children played soccer in the streets until the streetlights came on and neighbors borrowed cups of sugar without hesitation. Mrs. Betty Johnson, the retired teacher who lived next door, often watched the children through her kitchen window, ready to offer help or a plate of homemade cookies. Her presence had been a comfort to Miguel after Maria's death, providing the kind of community support that makes difficult times bearable. The Rodriguez family was woven into the fabric of this place, respected and loved by those around them. Miguel's daily routine was precise and purposeful. He would wake before dawn, prepare breakfast for both children, get Ethan ready for school, and ensure Sofia was clean, fed, and happy before Rosa Martinez arrived at 7:30 sharp. Rosa had been recommended by a co-worker whose family she had helped for years. She was a middle-aged woman with references and a warm smile who promised to treat Sofia like her own granddaughter. Miguel interviewed her thoroughly, checked her background, and felt confident that he had found someone trustworthy to care for his most precious treasure while he worked to keep their small family afloat. The arrangement seemed perfect in those early weeks. Rosa arrived promptly each morning, greeted both children with apparent affection, and kept the house tidy while Miguel was away. She prepared simple meals, changed Sofia's diapers, and even helped Ethan with his homework when he returned from school. Miguel noticed how Sofia seemed quiet around Rosa, but attributed it to his daughter's naturally reserved personality. Ethan had mentioned once or twice that Rosa seemed different when Daddy wasn't home, but children often needed time to adjust to new caregivers, and Miguel was grateful to have found someone reliable. Ethan Rodriguez carried the weight of responsibility on his small shoulders with a grace that would have impressed adults twice his age. At 7 years old, he possessed an intuitive understanding of his family's dynamics and needs that spoke to both his natural empathy and the circumstances that had shaped his young life. His dark eyes held a watchfulness that came from being attuned to the subtle changes in his baby sister's moods and needs, a vigilance born from love rather than duty. Every morning, Ethan would wake before his alarm clock, padding quietly to Sofia's crib to check on her. If she was still sleeping, he would watch her chest rise and fall, counting her breaths until he was satisfied she was safe. If she was awake, he would lift her carefully, supporting her head just like his father had taught him, and carry her to the kitchen for her morning bottle. These quiet moments before the house stirred to life were precious to Ethan, a time when he could focus entirely on his sister without the distractions of the outside world. At school, Mrs. Patterson, his second-grade teacher, had noticed how Ethan's attention sometimes wandered during lessons, particularly in the afternoons. When she asked him about it, he confessed that he worried about Sofia during the day, wondering if she was happy, if she was being fed on time, if Rosa was reading to her like he did. Mrs. Patterson was touched by the 7-year-old's concern for his sister and made a mental note to keep an eye on this sensitive child who seemed to carry burdens beyond his years. Ethan's love for Sofia manifested in countless small ways throughout their daily routine. He had learned to recognize her different cries, the hungry cry that started low and built to a wail, the tired cry that was more of a whimper, and the scared cry that came out as sharp, panicked bursts. He knew that she preferred her stuffed elephant over her other toys, that she calmed down when he sang the Spanish lullabies their mother had hummed during her pregnancy, and that she would smile and reach for him whenever he entered her line of sight. The bond between the siblings had been forged in the aftermath of their mother's death, when Miguel was drowning in grief and the demands of single parenthood. Ethan had stepped up naturally, instinctively, becoming Sofia's constant companion and protector. He would sit beside her crib for hours, talking to her in the mixture of English and Spanish that filled their home, telling her stories about their mother, about the adventures they would have when she was older, about how he would always keep her safe. Rosa Martinez had been watching this dynamic with growing irritation. She saw Ethan's devotion to his sister not as touching but as inconvenient, an obstacle to her preferred method of childcare, which involved minimal interaction and maximum control. When Miguel was present, Rosa played the role of the caring babysitter perfectly, cooing over Sofia and praising Ethan for being such a good big brother. But the moment Miguel's truck pulled out of the driveway, her demeanor shifted completely. Ethan began noticing the changes in Rosa's behavior within the first month of her employment. When his father was home, Rosa would engage with Sofia, playing peekaboo and making silly faces that delighted the toddler. But during the day, when Ethan would come home from school, he would find Sofia in her crib or playpen, often with a soiled diaper that seemed to have been unchanged for hours. Rosa would be in the living room, watching television or talking on her phone, barely acknowledging Sofia's presence unless she cried loudly enough to interrupt her activities. The 7-year-old tried to fill the gaps in Sofia's care whenever he was home. He would immediately check her diaper, give her water if she seemed thirsty, and hold her close until she stopped the fussy crying that had become her default state during Rosa's care. He began asking Rosa questions about Sofia's day, but her answers were always vague and dismissive. Sofia had been fine, she would say, just a little fussy, nothing to worry about. But Ethan's instincts told him something was wrong, even if he couldn't quite articulate what it was. The shift in their household dynamics began subtly, like the first drops of rain before a storm. Miguel had been offered overtime shifts at the garage, opportunities to earn extra money that their small family desperately needed. The work meant longer days, sometimes extending into the evening hours, but the additional income would help secure Sofia's future and maybe even allow them to move to a bigger house with a proper yard where she could play safely. Rosa readily agreed to the extended hours, assuring Miguel that she was happy to stay later and that Sofia would be in excellent hands. She quoted a reasonable rate for the additional time and promised to prepare dinner for both children, ensuring they would be fed and cared for until Miguel returned home. The arrangement seemed like a blessing, solving multiple problems at once while allowing Miguel to provide better for his family's future. Ethan felt uneasy about the change from the moment it was announced. Something in Rosa's eyes, when she looked at Sofia, had always bothered him, a coldness that seemed inconsistent with someone who claimed to love children. He had tried to express his concerns to his father, but 7-year-old worries about adult caregivers sounded like typical childhood adjustment issues to Miguel, who was grateful to have found reliable help. The extended hours meant that Ethan would return from school to find Rosa firmly in charge of the household routine. She would greet him at the door with instructions about homework and snacks, but her attention would quickly return to her phone or the television. Sofia would be confined to her playpen or high chair, often looking listless and withdrawn in a way that troubled Ethan deeply. When he tried to interact with his sister, Rosa would intervene with reasons why Sofia needed to be left alone. Miguel's new schedule meant he left before dawn and returned after dark, exhausted from long days of physical labor and grateful that his children were being cared for by someone he trusted. He would find them both fed and ready for bed, with Rosa providing cheerful reports about their day. Sofia might seem a little quiet, but Rosa assured him that toddlers went through phases, and Ethan's occasional questions about his sister's well-being were preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dismissed as the normal concerns of a protective older brother. The first sign that something was seriously wrong came on a Tuesday evening in late July. Miguel had called to say he would be working even later than usual, helping a customer whose car had broken down on the highway. Rosa assured him that she would stay with the children and get them to bed at their normal time. Ethan had been in his room working on a summer reading assignment when he heard Sofia crying from somewhere in the house. But the sound seemed muffled and distant. When he went to look for his sister, he found her bedroom empty, her crib unused. Rosa was in the living room, watching a movie with the volume turned up high, seemingly oblivious to Sofia's distressed cries. When Ethan asked where Sofia was, Rosa told him sharply that his sister was taking a nap and he should mind his own business. But the crying continued, and Ethan's worry grew with each passing minute. That night, when Miguel returned home, he found both children in their beds, apparently peaceful and well cared for. Rosa gave him her usual positive report about their day, mentioned that Sofia had been a little cranky, but nothing unusual, and collected her payment before heading home. Ethan wanted to tell his father about the strange crying and Sofia's absence from her room, but Rosa's stern warnings about tattling and causing trouble echoed in his mind. He decided to watch more carefully, to gather more information before raising concerns that might sound like childish imagination. Over the following weeks, Ethan began to notice a pattern in Rosa's behavior that filled him with growing dread. Each day after school, he would race home, ostensibly to start his homework, but really to check on Sofia. What he found was becoming increasingly disturbing. His baby sister, once a cheerful and active toddler, was becoming withdrawn and fearful. She would cling to Ethan desperately when he picked her up, as if afraid he might leave her again. Sofia's appetite had diminished significantly, and she seemed to reject food during the day, only eating eagerly when Miguel fed her in the evenings or when Ethan prepared her snacks after school. Her sleep patterns had become erratic, with frequent nightmares that left her crying inconsolably until Ethan could comfort her. Most troubling of all, she had developed an obvious fear of the basement, crying whenever she was carried near the door that led downstairs. Rosa's explanations for Sofia's changes were always plausible when presented to Miguel. Toddlers were naturally moody, she would say. Sofia was probably going through a developmental phase, or perhaps she was cutting new teeth. Children often became clingy with their siblings, and it was normal for eating and sleeping patterns to fluctuate. Miguel, exhausted from long work days and grateful for Rosa's apparent expertise, accepted these explanations without question. But Ethan noticed details that escaped his father's attention. He saw how Sofia would shrink away from Rosa's touch, how she would stop playing and become very still whenever Rosa entered the room. He observed that Sofia's diapers were often unchanged for hours, leaving her with painful rashes that Rosa attributed to sensitive skin. Most alarming of all, he began to notice that Sofia would sometimes be missing from the main areas of the house during the day, with Rosa claiming she was napping in various locations that Ethan could never quite locate. Mrs. Johnson, the elderly neighbor, mentioned to Miguel one evening that she had been concerned about not seeing Sofia playing in the backyard lately. She remembered how the toddler used to love being outside, crawling on the grass and playing with toys while Rosa supervised from the porch. But recently, the backyard had been empty during the day, with no sign of either Sofia or Rosa. Miguel assured Mrs. Johnson that everything was fine, that Rosa was probably keeping Sofia inside due to the intense August heat. Ethan's attempts to spend more time with Sofia were increasingly met with resistance from Rosa. She would insist that his sister needed quiet time, that too much stimulation wasn't good for toddlers, that Ethan's presence was disruptive to the daily routine she had established. When Ethan persisted in asking questions about Sofia's welfare, Rosa's responses became sharper, more threatening. She warned him about the consequences of being a troublemaker, about how fathers didn't like children who caused problems for their caregivers. The 7-year-old found himself caught in an impossible situation. His instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong with Sofia's care, but he lacked the vocabulary and experience to articulate his concerns in a way that would convince his father. Rosa's threats about being a tattletale resonated with childhood fears about getting in trouble, while her apparent expertise and adult authority made Ethan question his own perceptions. He began to withdraw, spending more time in his room, trying to process what he was seeing and feeling. The first undeniable evidence of Rosa's true nature came on a sweltering Thursday afternoon in early August. Ethan had been dismissed early from summer school due to a broken air conditioning system, and he arrived home nearly 2 hours before his usual time. He used his key quietly, hoping to surprise Sofia with extra playtime before Rosa's usual restrictions took effect. What he witnessed instead would haunt him for weeks to come. Rosa was in the kitchen, talking loudly on her phone in rapid Spanish, laughing at something the person on the other end had said. Sofia was nowhere to be seen in the main living areas, but Ethan could hear faint crying coming from somewhere in the house. He followed the sound through the hallway, past the bedrooms to the basement door. The crying was definitely coming from below, muffled but unmistakably his sister's distressed voice. The basement door was locked from the outside, something that had never been the case before. Ethan tried the handle repeatedly, his heart racing as Sofia's cries grew more desperate. He ran back to the kitchen, where Rosa was still engaged in her phone conversation, seemingly oblivious to the sounds coming from below. When Ethan tugged on her sleeve and pointed toward the basement, Rosa covered the phone and told him harshly to go to his room and stay there until she said otherwise. But Ethan couldn't abandon his sister. He returned to the basement door, calling Sofia's name through the wood and trying to comfort her with his voice. Her crying intensified when she heard him, as if she understood that help was near but couldn't reach her. Ethan pounded on the door, shouting for Rosa to come and unlock it. But the woman remained in the kitchen, her conversation continuing as if nothing was happening. When Rosa finally ended her phone call and found Ethan by the basement door, her mask of gentle caregiving fell away completely. She grabbed him roughly by the arm, her fingers digging into his skin as she dragged him away from the door. Her voice was cold and threatening as she told him that Sofia was being punished for bad behavior, that good children stayed where they were put, and that Ethan would find himself in the same place if he didn't learn to mind his own business. The threat was explicit and terrifying. Rosa made it clear that she was in complete control of the household during Miguel's absence, that what happened to Sofia could just as easily happen to Ethan if he continued to interfere with her methods of childcare. She warned him that fathers didn't keep babysitters who had to deal with troublesome children, that causing problems could result in both children being sent away to strangers who might not be as patient as she was. Ethan was 7 years old, terrified and completely alone in his knowledge of what was happening to his sister. The adult who was supposed to protect them had revealed herself to be a threat, someone who viewed Sofia not as a precious child to be cared for, but as an inconvenience to be controlled through fear and isolation. The basement had become a prison, and Rosa held the key to both his sister's suffering and his own potential fate. That evening, when Miguel returned home, Ethan watched Rosa transform back into the caring babysitter she pretended to be. She greeted Miguel warmly, reported that both children had been good, and mentioned that Sofia had been a little tired and cranky, but nothing unusual. Sofia was in her crib, apparently sleeping peacefully, though Ethan noticed how she startled and whimpered when Rosa leaned over to adjust her blanket. Miguel thanked Rosa for her dedication, paid her for the day's work, and settled in for a quiet evening with his children. Ethan desperately wanted to tell his father what he had witnessed, but Rosa's threats echoed in his mind. What if his father didn't believe him? What if Rosa denied everything? What if telling the truth really did result in them being sent away? The weight of the secret felt crushing, but the fear of the consequences kept him silent. Over the next several days, Rosa's treatment of Sofia became increasingly harsh and systematic. The basement had become her preferred method of dealing with any behavior she deemed unacceptable, which included Sofia's natural toddler activities like crying, asking for attention, or wanting to be held. What had once been occasional punishments became daily occurrences, with Sofia spending hours alone in the dark, confined space below the house. Ethan's attempts to intervene were met with increasingly severe threats. Rosa made it clear that any interference on his part would result in longer periods of isolation for Sofia, turning his protective instincts against him. She began assigning him extra chores and homework immediately after school, keeping him occupied and away from his sister during the crucial hours when Sofia needed comfort and care most. The physical evidence of Sofia's mistreatment was becoming harder to hide. She had developed a persistent cough from the damp basement air. Her skin was pale from lack of sunlight, and she had lost noticeable weight from irregular feeding. Rosa attributed these changes to various childhood ailments when Miguel expressed concern, suggesting that Sofia might be coming down with a cold or going through a natural growth phase that would resolve itself with time. Sofia's behavior had changed dramatically as well. The once curious and playful toddler had become withdrawn and fearful, flinching away from sudden movements and showing signs of severe anxiety whenever she was separated from Ethan. She had stopped babbling and laughing, instead communicating primarily through different types of crying that Ethan was learning to interpret as expressions of hunger, fear, pain, or desperate loneliness. Rosa's confidence in her ability to control the situation had grown with each successful day of hiding her abuse. She began staying later in the evenings, sometimes not leaving until just before Miguel's return, maximizing the time she had to implement her cruel routine. She would spend her days in comfort, watching television and talking on the phone, while Sofia remained confined below, forgotten and afraid. The basement itself had become a place of horror for the 18-month-old. It was a converted storage room with concrete walls, minimal ventilation, and a single bare bulb that Rosa rarely bothered to turn on. The space was damp and cold, filled with the accumulated dust and debris of years. Sofia would be placed there on an old blanket, with no toys, no food, and no company except for the sounds of the house above her and the occasional scurrying of mice in the walls. Ethan's sleep was increasingly disrupted by nightmares and anxiety about his sister's welfare. He would lie awake at night, listening for any sounds that might indicate Sofia was in distress, but the basement was too far from his bedroom for him to hear anything. His grades at summer school began to suffer as his attention was consumed by worry, and his teacher sent a note home expressing concern about his obvious distraction and emotional state. Mrs. Johnson noticed that Ethan seemed different when she saw him playing in the yard. The cheerful, energetic child she had known was becoming withdrawn and anxious, spending most of his outdoor time sitting quietly rather than engaging in the active play typical of 7-year-olds. When she asked him about Sofia, he would give vague answers and quickly change the subject, his eyes reflecting a sadness that seemed far too mature for his age. The situation reached a critical point on a Friday evening in mid-August when Miguel called to inform Rosa that he would be working an overnight shift. A major accident on the highway had brought several damaged vehicles to the garage, and Miguel's expertise was needed to get them roadworthy as quickly as possible. The overtime pay would be substantial, money that could help secure their families' financial future, but it meant leaving the children in Rosa's care for nearly 24 hours. Rosa's enthusiasm for the extended time was immediate and unsettling. She assured Miguel that everything would be fine, that she would take excellent care of both children, and that he shouldn't worry about anything at home. She even offered to prepare special meals and plan fun activities for the weekend, playing the role of the dedicated caregiver so convincingly that Miguel felt grateful rather than concerned about the arrangement. For Ethan, the news felt like a death sentence. 24 hours under Rosa's complete control, with no possibility of his father returning unexpectedly to check on them, meant that Rosa would be free to implement whatever cruel routine she chose without fear of discovery. He tried to express his concerns to his father before he left, but Miguel was focused on the work ahead and interpreted Ethan's anxiety as normal childhood worry about being away from him for so long. As soon as Miguel's truck disappeared down the street, Rosa's demeanor shifted to one of cold efficiency. She informed Ethan that he would be spending the evening in his room, working on educational activities she had prepared, while Sofia would be having quiet time in the basement. When Ethan protested that Sofia needed dinner and her bedtime routine, Rosa told him sharply that she would decide what Sofia needed and when she would receive it. The basement door was locked by 6 o'clock that evening, with Sofia's increasingly desperate cries echoing through the house as darkness fell. Ethan was confined to his room with strict instructions not to come out for any reason, but he could still hear his sister's distress through the floor. The sound was heartbreaking, a sustained wailing that spoke of hunger, fear, and abandonment that no 18-month-old should ever experience. Rosa spent the evening watching television in the living room, the volume turned up loud enough to mask Sofia's cries from any neighbors who might be concerned. She ordered pizza for herself and Ethan, eating leisurely, while Sofia remained below without food or water. When Ethan refused to eat, citing worry about his sister, Rosa threatened to join Sofia in the basement if he didn't clean his plate and stop causing trouble. The night stretched endlessly for both children. Ethan lay in his bed, tormented by the sounds of Sofia's intermittent crying and the knowledge that he was powerless to help her. Every parental instinct he had developed over the past 18 months screamed at him to rescue his sister, but Rosa's threats and his own fear of making the situation worse kept him frozen in indecision. The house felt like a prison, with Rosa as the warden and both children as her captives. By morning, Sofia's cries had weakened to occasional whimpers, a sign that filled Ethan with even greater terror. Was she becoming too weak to call for help? Was she sick from the cold, damp conditions in the basement? Was she giving up hope that anyone would come to rescue her? The questions tormented him as he listened to Rosa moving around the house above, preparing her own breakfast while his sister remained forgotten below. Saturday morning arrived with the oppressive heat that only a Texas summer could deliver, and with it came the realization that Ethan's worst fears were becoming reality. Rosa had woken early, not to tend to the children, but to establish her complete dominance over the household. Sofia had spent the entire night in the basement, her cries gradually weakening until an ominous silence had settled over the house like a suffocating blanket. When Ethan finally heard movement downstairs, it wasn't the sound of Rosa rescuing his sister, but rather the casual noises of someone preparing breakfast for herself alone. The smell of bacon and coffee drifted up to Ethan's room, a cruel mockery of normal weekend mornings when Miguel would prepare elaborate breakfasts for his children, complete with pancakes shaped like animals and fresh orange juice. Instead, Sofia remained trapped below while Rosa enjoyed her meal in comfort, seemingly oblivious to the suffering she had caused. When Ethan crept to his bedroom door and listened carefully, he could no longer hear any sounds from the basement. A silence that filled him with a terror so profound it made his small body shake uncontrollably. The 7-year-old had spent the sleepless night trying to formulate a plan to help his sister, but every option seemed to lead to worse consequences. If he called out to neighbors, Rosa might hurt Sofia even more severely. If he tried to break down the basement door, he lacked the physical strength to succeed and would only anger Rosa further. If he called his father, Rosa might disappear with Sofia before Miguel could return home. The weight of impossible choices pressed down on Ethan's young shoulders, making him feel helpless in a way that contradicted every protective instinct he possessed. Rosa's voice, calling his name from downstairs, carried a false cheerfulness that made Ethan's skin crawl. She announced that breakfast was ready and that he needed to come eat like a good boy, as if the horror of the previous night had never happened. When Ethan appeared in the kitchen, he found a single plate set at the table with scrambled eggs and toast, while Rosa sat across from him with her own generous portion. The absence of any preparation for Sofia spoke volumes about Rosa's intentions for the day ahead. The basement door remained firmly closed and locked, a barrier that might as well have been made of steel for all the good Ethan's desperate desire to reach his sister could do against it. Rosa watched him carefully as he pushed food around his plate, unable to eat, while knowing that Sofia had gone without meals for nearly 24 hours. When she commanded him to finish his breakfast or face consequences, Ethan forced himself to choke down the food, hoping that compliance might somehow earn mercy for his sister. But Rosa's idea of mercy was simply the absence of additional cruelty rather than any positive care. She informed Ethan that Sofia was learning an important lesson about proper behavior, and that the lesson would continue until she demonstrated the kind of quiet, obedient conduct that Rosa expected from the children in her care. The casual way she discussed his sister's suffering as if it were a reasonable educational technique rather than horrific abuse revealed the depth of Rosa's twisted thinking about childcare. The day stretched ahead like an endless nightmare, with Rosa establishing a routine that involved keeping Ethan isolated in various parts of the house while she enjoyed her Saturday leisure activities. She assigned him meaningless busy work, puzzles and workbooks that were designed to keep his hands and mind occupied while preventing him from focusing on Sofia's plight. Every few hours, she would check on his progress, praising him for being such a good, quiet boy, while making veiled threats about what happened to children who caused disruptions. Mrs. Johnson appeared at the front door around noon, carrying a plate of fresh cookies and asking about the family. Through the window, Ethan could see her kind face creased with concern, and for a moment, hope flared in his chest. Surely Mrs. Johnson would notice that something was wrong, would ask the right questions, would somehow understand that Sofia was in terrible danger. But Rosa handled the interaction with practiced skill, greeting the elderly neighbor warmly and explaining that Sofia was napping after a difficult night of teething and that Ethan was being extra quiet to help his sister rest. Mrs. Johnson accepted the explanation without suspicion, even commending Rosa for being so thoughtful about the children's needs. She left the cookies with instructions to give Sofia extra cuddles when she woke up, never knowing that her words were like knives in Ethan's heart. The missed opportunity for rescue left him feeling more alone and desperate than ever, realizing that Rosa's ability to deceive adults might be too sophisticated for his 7-year-old attempts at seeking help to overcome. As the afternoon wore on, the silence from the basement became increasingly ominous. Ethan strained his ears constantly, hoping to hear some sign that Sofia was still conscious, still fighting, still alive. The absence of crying, which might have seemed like relief to some, felt like the most terrifying development possible to a brother who knew his sister's patterns intimately. Sofia was not a quiet baby under normal circumstances. Her silence now could only mean that she was too weak, too sick, or too afraid to make any sound at all. Rosa seemed to take satisfaction in Ethan's obvious distress, commenting periodically about how nice it was to have such a peaceful house and how much better behaved Sofia was becoming under her guidance. She would unlock the basement door just long enough to carry down a small cup of water, returning within minutes with reports that Sofia was learning her lessons very well. The brevity of these visits and Rosa's casual demeanor suggested that she was providing only the minimum necessary to keep Sofia alive, not the care and comfort that a frightened toddler desperately needed. The psychological torture of being forced to remain upstairs while his sister suffered below was devastating to Ethan's young mind. He found himself bargaining with God, with fate, with anyone who might be listening, promising to be perfect forever. If only Sofia could be safe. He offered to take her place in the basement, to accept any punishment Rosa wanted to give, if she would just let his sister return to the light and warmth of the house above. But his prayers seemed to disappear into the oppressive silence that had settled over their home like a shroud. By evening, Ethan's anxiety had reached a level that was affecting him physically. His stomach churned with nausea. His hands trembled uncontrollably, and his breathing came in short, panicked gasps that he tried to hide from Rosa's watchful eyes. The woman seemed to take pleasure in his distress, making comments about how sensitive he was and how he needed to learn to be stronger if he wanted to be a good big brother. Her complete lack of empathy for either child's suffering revealed a cruelty that went beyond simple neglect into something actively malicious. The second night promised to be even worse than the first, with Rosa announcing that Sofia's education would continue until she learned to be consistently quiet and obedient. She locked Ethan in his room again, but this time with additional threats about what would happen if she heard so much as a whisper from him during the night. The house settled into an unnatural quiet that felt oppressive and wrong, nothing like the comfortable nighttime sounds of a home where children were safe and loved. Ethan lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling and fighting waves of panic that threatened to overwhelm his young mind. 18 months old was too young for a child to understand why she was being punished, too young to learn the lessons Rosa claimed to be teaching, too young to survive much more of this treatment without serious physical and emotional damage. The knowledge that his baby sister was suffering in ways he couldn't even fully comprehend filled Ethan with a rage and helplessness that felt too big for his small body to contain. The night dragged on with excruciating slowness, each hour marked by Ethan's internal countdown of how long Sofia had been without proper food, without comfort, without the basic human contact that babies needed to thrive. He tried to send mental messages to his sister, hoping somehow that she could feel his love and concern even through the floors and walls that separated them. He promised her silently that he would find a way to help her, that he wouldn't abandon her, that somehow they would get through this nightmare together. But as Sunday morning approached with no sign of improvement in their situation, Ethan began to confront the possibility that his promises might be empty, that his love and determination might not be enough to save Sofia from Rosa's cruelty. The weight of potential failure pressed down on him like a physical force, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to maintain the hope that had been sustaining him through the darkest hours of his young life. Rosa's satisfied humming from the kitchen as she prepared another breakfast for herself alone served as a soundtrack to Ethan's despair. She had successfully created a situation where she could torture a baby with impunity, where a 7-year-old boy was powerless to protect the person he loved most in the world, where the normal safety nets of community and family had failed completely. The house that had once been filled with laughter and love had become a prison where innocence was being systematically destroyed. The realization that Miguel wouldn't return until Sunday evening meant that Sofia faced at least another 12 hours in the basement, another 12 hours without adequate food or water, another 12 hours of isolation and fear that no 18-month-old should ever have to endure. Ethan's mind raced through increasingly desperate scenarios, each more dangerous than the last, as he tried to find some way to break the cycle of abuse before it was too late. As Sunday morning sunlight streamed through his bedroom window, highlighting the dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits, Ethan made a decision that would change everything. He could no longer wait for adult intervention that might never come, could no longer hope that Rosa would suddenly develop compassion, could no longer trust that the normal systems of protection would save his sister. At 7 years old, he would have to become Sofia's rescuer, regardless of the personal cost, regardless of his own fear, regardless of the consequences that Rosa had threatened. The plan that formed in his young mind was simple in its desperation and terrifying in its necessity. He would wait until Rosa was distracted, find a way to get to the basement door, and call for help in the most direct way possible. He had seen enough television shows and heard enough adult conversations to know that 911 existed for emergencies, and surely Sofia's situation qualified as the biggest emergency he could imagine. The risks were enormous, but the alternative of doing nothing while his sister suffered was no longer acceptable to him. As he listened to Rosa moving around downstairs, humming cheerfully while she enjoyed her comfortable morning routine, Ethan began to gather his courage for what might be the most important action of his young life. He had no way of knowing whether his plan would succeed, whether help would arrive in time, whether Rosa would retaliate against Sofia before rescue could come. All he knew was that he couldn't spend another hour as a helpless witness to his sister's suffering, couldn't live with himself if he didn't try everything possible to save her. The weight of the decision settled over him like armor, transforming his fear into determination and his helplessness into purpose. Sofia was depending on him in a way that went beyond normal sibling relationships, depending on him to be braver and stronger than any 7-year-old should have to be. But Ethan had been preparing for this responsibility his entire short life, learning to put her needs before his own, learning to recognize her distress, learning to be the protector she needed when the adults in their world failed her. As he prepared to put his desperate plan into action, Ethan whispered a promise to his sister through the walls and floors that separated them, a promise that he would not let her suffer alone anymore, that help was coming, that their nightmare was about to end. He didn't know if she could hear him, didn't know if she was even conscious enough to understand, but he needed to believe that somehow his love and determination could reach her in the darkness where Rosa had trapped her. The house around him seemed to hold its breath as Ethan prepared to take the most courageous action of his young life, an action that would transform him from a helpless witness to his sister's abuse into the hero who would finally bring their suffering to light. The time for waiting and hoping was over. The time for action had finally arrived, and with it came the possibility that both children might finally be free from Rosa's cruelty. Sunday morning brought with it a clarity that cut through Ethan's despair like sunlight-piercing storm clouds. As he listened to Rosa's footsteps moving leisurely around the kitchen below, the sound of cabinets opening and closing as she prepared yet another meal for herself while Sofia remained forgotten in the basement, something fundamental shifted. Inside the 7-year-old boy, the fear that had paralyzed him for so long began to transform into something harder, more focused, more dangerous to Rosa's carefully constructed world of hidden cruelty. The transformation didn't happen all at once, but rather built slowly as Ethan processed the full scope of what was happening in his own home. Sofia had now been trapped in the basement for over 36 hours, surviving on minimal water and no solid food, isolated from all human comfort and warmth. She was 18 months old, barely more than a baby, and she was being systematically tortured by the woman his father trusted to keep her safe. The mathematics of the situation were simple and horrifying. If nothing changed, Sofia might not survive much longer. Rosa's voice drifted up from downstairs as she talked on her phone, laughing about her weekend plans with a friend, discussing mundane topics like grocery shopping and television shows while a toddler suffered in the darkness below her feet. The casual nature of her conversation, the complete absence of any concern for Sofia's welfare, revealed the depth of her indifference to the child's humanity. To Rosa, Sofia wasn't a precious little girl with bright eyes and an infectious giggle. She was simply an inconvenience to be managed through whatever means necessary. The realization struck Ethan with devastating force. No adult was coming to save Sofia. His father wouldn't return until evening, and when he did, Rosa would once again perform her act of the caring babysitter, presenting both children as well cared for and happy. Mrs. Johnson had already been deceived by Rosa's skilled manipulation. The neighbors, who might have heard Sofia's cries, were probably dismissing them as normal childhood fussiness. The systems that were supposed to protect children had failed completely, leaving Sofia's fate entirely in the hands of her 7-year-old brother. But with this terrible understanding came a different kind of power. If no adult could save Sofia, then Ethan would have to become something more than a child himself. He would have to find reserves of courage and determination that went beyond his years, would have to risk everything he held dear to give his sister a chance at survival. The weight of this responsibility was crushing, but it was also liberating in a way that surprised him. For the first time since Rosa had revealed her true nature, Ethan had a clear sense of purpose. The plan that had been forming in his mind throughout the dark hours of the night began to crystallize into concrete steps. He needed to get to a phone when Rosa was distracted, needed to call 911, needed to clearly explain what was happening to Sofia in a way that would bring immediate help. But more than that, he needed to be prepared for Rosa's reaction when she discovered what he had done. She had threatened to put him in the basement with Sofia if he caused trouble, and she might very well follow through on that threat when she realized he had called for outside intervention. Ethan found himself oddly calm as he considered these possibilities. If calling for help meant joining Sofia in the basement, at least she wouldn't be alone anymore. If it meant facing Rosa's anger, at least it would draw her attention away from his sister. If it meant getting in trouble with his Father for going behind Rosa's back. At least Miguel would finally learn the truth about what had been happening in their home. Every possible consequence seemed manageable compared to the alternative of watching Sofia slowly deteriorate in her underground prison. The cordless phone in the kitchen represented both opportunity and enormous risk. Rosa kept it close to her during the day, using it frequently for her personal calls, but there were brief moments when she would set it aside to attend to other tasks. Ethan began tracking these moments carefully, noting when Rosa would leave the kitchen to use the bathroom, when she would step outside to smoke cigarettes, when she would become absorbed in television programs that held her complete attention. The waiting was excruciating, made worse by the continued silence from the basement. Ethan pressed his ear to the floor of his bedroom, straining to hear any sound that might indicate Sofia was still conscious and responsive. The absence of crying, which had once seemed like a mercy, now felt like a countdown to disaster. Babies. Sofia's age needed constant interaction and stimulation to thrive. The sensory deprivation Rosa was imposing could cause permanent damage, even if Sofia survived the physical aspects of her imprisonment. Around noon, Rosa announced through Ethan's locked bedroom door that she was going outside to water the plants in the backyard, a task that would take her several minutes and position her where she couldn't immediately see or hear what was happening inside the house. This was the opportunity Ethan had been waiting for. The brief window of time when he might be able to act without immediate detection. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it echoing in his ears as he prepared to execute the most important plan of his young life. The bedroom door wasn't actually locked with a key, just a simple latch that Rosa used to keep him contained while she went about her activities. Ethan had discovered earlier that he could manipulate the latch from the inside by using a ruler to push against the mechanism, a technique he had learned months ago during games of hide and seek with Sofia. The irony that a game played with his sister might now be the key to saving her wasn't lost on him as he carefully worked the ruler against the metal latch. The soft click of the latch releasing sounded as loud as a gunshot to Ethan's heightened senses, and he froze for several seconds, listening for any indication that Rosa had heard the sound. When no footsteps came rushing back into the house, he eased the door open and crept toward the stairs, moving with the stealth that only children seem to possess when they're truly motivated to avoid detection. Every creak of the old wooden floors seemed magnified. Every shadow seemed to hide the possibility of Rosa's sudden return. The kitchen felt enormous as Ethan entered it, his small size making the familiar space seem like a vast territory to be crossed under enemy surveillance. The cordless phone sat on the counter near the window, positioned where Rosa could see the backyard while she talked. Through that same window, Ethan could see Rosa moving between the flower beds, her back turned to the house as she focused on her gardening tasks. This was his chance, possibly his only chance, and he couldn't afford to waste it on hesitation or fear. His small fingers trembled as he picked up the phone and dialed the 3 numbers he had been taught were for emergencies. 911. The ringing seemed to go on forever, each tone stretching into eternity as Ethan watched Rosa through the window and prepared to explain the most complicated and urgent situation of his young life to a complete stranger. When a voice finally answered, professional and calm, asking about the nature of his emergency, Ethan felt his rehearsed words tumble out in a rush of desperate explanation. The 911 operator was a woman named Patricia who had been handling emergency calls for over 15 years, but she had never received a call quite like the one from 7-year-old Ethan Rodriguez. His voice was small and frightened, but determined, in a way that immediately captured her attention and concern. He spoke quickly but clearly, explaining that his baby sister was locked in the basement by their babysitter, that she had been down there for more than a day without food, that she wasn't crying anymore, and he was scared she might be really sick or hurt. Patricia's training kicked in immediately as she began gathering the crucial information needed to dispatch emergency services. She kept her voice calm and reassuring while asking Ethan for his address, for details about his sister's condition, for information about the babysitter and when his father would return home. But even as she maintained her professional demeanor, Patricia felt a chill of recognition. In her years of handling emergency calls, she had learned to distinguish between childhood pranks and genuine cries for help, and everything about Ethan's call screamed authentic desperation. Ethan provided answers as quickly as he could, glancing repeatedly toward the window to monitor Rosa's location in the backyard. She was still focused on her plants, but he knew that her outdoor tasks wouldn't occupy her attention much longer. He needed to finish this call and get back to his room before she returned, or everything would be ruined. The operator seemed to understand his urgency, asking rapid-fire questions about immediate dangers and promising that help was already on the way. The moment that changed everything came when Patricia asked Ethan if he could safely check on his sister's condition. The question crystallized the choice that had been building in his mind throughout the entire ordeal. He could play it safe, return to his room, and wait for adults to handle the situation, or he could risk everything to get to Sofia and provide the operator with the information that might save her life. Without hesitation, Ethan chose his sister over his own safety, telling Patricia that he was going to the basement door to see if Sofia was okay. Rosa was still in the backyard when Ethan crept through the house toward the basement door, the cordless phone pressed against his ear as Patricia stayed on the cell line to monitor the situation and provide guidance. The basement door loomed before him like the entrance to a nightmare, its simple wooden surface concealing horrors that no child should ever have to witness. The lock was a basic sliding bolt, easy enough for an adult to operate, but positioned just high enough to be challenging for a 7-year-old's reach. Standing on his tiptoes and stretching as far as his small body would allow, Ethan managed to slide the bolt back with a metallic scraping sound that seemed to echo through the entire house. The door swung open to reveal wooden stairs descending into darkness, and from somewhere in that darkness came the faintest sound of whimpering, so soft it might have been mistaken for the settling of the old house if Ethan hadn't been listening, with every fiber of his being, for signs of his sister's survival. Patricia's voice in his ear provided steady encouragement as Ethan descended the creaking stairs, his free hand trailing along the wall to guide him in the dim light, filtering down from the kitchen above. The basement was cooler than the rest of the house, with a musty smell that spoke of dampness and neglect. Old boxes and forgotten furniture created shadowy obstacles that Ethan had to navigate carefully as he followed the sound of Sofia's weak cries toward the far corner where Rosa had been keeping her. What Ethan found in that corner would haunt him for the rest of his life, but it also filled him with a fierce determination that burned away the last of his childhood innocence. Sofia was huddled on a thin blanket that provided little protection. From the cold concrete floor, her small body curled into a tight ball as if trying to disappear entirely. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt, her clothes were soiled, and she looked so small and fragile that Ethan's heart broke just looking at her. But she was alive. She was conscious, and when she heard his voice calling her name, she lifted her head and reached toward him with desperate hope. Patricia's voice guided Ethan through a quick assessment of Sofia's condition, helping him determine that while she was clearly dehydrated and frightened, she didn't appear to have any obvious injuries that would require immediate medical intervention. The relief in Patricia's voice when Ethan reported that Sofia was responsive and moving normally was palpable, but she stressed that emergency services were still en route and that both children needed to stay exactly where they were until help arrived. The reunion between brother and sister in that basement corner was both heartbreaking and beautiful. Sofia clung to Ethan with desperate strength, her tiny fingers gripping his shirt as if he might disappear again if she let go. Her attempts to communicate her distress came out as a mixture of whimpers and babbled words, but Ethan understood perfectly the message she was trying to convey. She had been terrified, alone, and convinced that no one was coming to save her. His whispered reassurances that help was coming, that she was safe now, that he would never let anyone hurt her again, seemed to calm her fractionally, though she continued to shake with fear and exhaustion. Patricia maintained contact with Ethan. Throughout this emotional reunion, coordinating with the emergency responders who were already en route to the Rodriguez home, she could hear the genuine love and concern in the 7-year-old's voice as he comforted his sister, could sense the maturity that had been forced upon him by circumstances no child should ever face. Her own experience as a mother made her heart ache for both children, trapped in a situation that should never have been allowed to develop to such a critical point. The sound of Rosa's voice calling from upstairs shattered the fragile peace of the basement reunion. She was back in the house, had discovered Ethan missing from his room, and was searching for him with growing anger and suspicion. Patricia's voice became more urgent as she coached Ethan through the next crucial moments, explaining that he needed to stay calm, needed to keep Sofia quiet, needed to trust that help was almost there. The sound of police sirens in the distance provided the first concrete evidence that rescue was indeed coming. But Rosa's footsteps moving through the house above suggested that the next few minutes would be the most dangerous yet. Patricia had dispatched not only police officers, but also paramedics and child protective services, understanding from Ethan's initial call that this situation involved serious child abuse that would require a coordinated response from multiple agencies. The 911 system had worked exactly as it was designed to, mobilizing resources to protect children in immediate danger. But the success of the rescue operation would ultimately depend on the courage of a 7-year-old boy who had risked everything to save his baby sister. As Rosa's voice grew closer and more agitated, Patricia made a decision that went beyond her usual protocol. Instead of simply monitoring the situation, she began coaching Ethan through active steps to protect himself. And Sofia, understanding that the next few minutes before police arrival would be critical to both children's safety. Her years of experience had taught her that domestic situations involving child abuse could escalate rapidly when the abuser realized they were about to be exposed, and she wasn't going to let these children face that danger alone. The transformation that had begun in Ethan's mind hours earlier was now complete. He was no longer a helpless victim of Rosa's cruelty, no longer a frightened child hoping for adult intervention. He had become Sofia's protector in the most literal sense, placing himself between her and harm, ready to face whatever consequences might come from his decision to call for help. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a fierce determination to see this through to the end, to ensure that Sofia would never again be trapped in darkness and despair. As the sirens grew louder and Rosa's search became more frantic, Ethan held his sister close and whispered the promise that would define the rest of their lives together. No matter what happened next, no matter what adults did or failed to do, he would always be there to protect her, would always put her safety above his own, would always be the big brother she could count on when the world became too frightening to face alone. In that basement corner, surrounded by the evidence of Rosa's cruelty, but filled with hope for the first time in days, 2 children waited for rescue while their bond deepened into something unbreakable. The sound of Rosa's footsteps above them grew more urgent and aggressive as she realized that her carefully controlled environment was beginning to unravel. Her voice carried a sharp edge of panic as she called Ethan's name throughout the house, no longer bothering to maintain the sweet, caring tone she used when Miguel was present. Patricia's voice in Ethan's ear became a lifeline of calm professionalism as she guided him through the most dangerous moments of their ordeal, explaining that police officers were now pulling into the driveway and that he needed to stay exactly where he was with Sofia until they could secure the scene. Rosa's discovery of the unlocked bedroom door triggered an explosion of rage that reverberated through the entire house. Her shouts of anger and frustration echoed down the basement stairs as she realized that her victim had escaped her control and potentially exposed her crimes. The transformation from manipulative caregiver to revealed predator was complete, and the mask she had worn for months finally fell away entirely. Ethan could hear furniture being moved violently overhead as Rosa searched for him, her voice becoming increasingly unhinged as she called threats about what would happen when she found him. Sofia trembled in Ethan's arms as the sounds of Rosa's fury filtered down from above, her small body pressing closer to her brother's as if she could somehow disappear into his protective embrace. The 18-month-old didn't understand the complexities of what was happening, but she recognized the angry voice of the woman who had caused her so much suffering, and her fear was palpable. Ethan whispered constant reassurances to his sister, his own voice steady despite the terror he felt as Rosa's search grew closer to the basement door. Patricia coordinated with the responding officers through her headset while maintaining contact with Ethan, providing a crucial communication link between the children in immediate danger and the law enforcement personnel preparing to intervene. The lead officer, Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, was a 15-year veteran with extensive experience in domestic violence and child abuse cases, and she immediately understood the volatile nature of the situation they were entering. Her team approached the house with tactical precision, knowing that cornered abusers often became most dangerous when their crimes were about to be exposed. The moment Rosa heard the police sirens pulling up outside the house marked the beginning of her complete psychological breakdown. Years of successfully hiding her abuse behind a facade of caring childcare had convinced her that she was invulnerable, that her ability to manipulate and deceive adults would always protect her from consequences. The realization that a 7-year-old boy had outmaneuvered her, had found a way to expose her crimes and bring help to his sister, shattered her sense of control and superiority in ways that made her dangerous and unpredictable. Rosa's first instinct was to flee, to escape the house before police could enter and discover the evidence of her systematic abuse. But the sound of car doors slamming and authoritative voices coordinating outside told her that escape was no longer possible. Her second instinct was to create a plausible story, to spin the situation in a way that would make her appear to be the victim of false accusations from a troubled child. But the basement door standing open and the evidence of Sofia's imprisonment would be impossible to explain away to trained investigators. Sergeant Gonzalez's voice echoed through the house as she announced police presence and demanded that all occupants show themselves immediately. Her tone was professional, but carried an unmistakable authority that brooked no argument or delay. Rosa's panicked response was to rush toward the basement door, perhaps hoping to somehow hide the evidence of her crimes or to prevent the children from speaking to the officers. But Patricia had anticipated this possibility and had warned Ethan to stay hidden with Sofia until police could physically secure the scene. The confrontation between Rosa and the responding officers occurred at the top of the basement stairs, with Rosa attempting to block access while claiming that nothing was wrong, that the children were fine, that there had been some kind of misunderstanding. But Sergeant Gonzalez had been briefed on the details of Ethan's 911 call during her response to the scene, and she immediately recognized Rosa's behavior as consistent with that of an abuser trying to prevent discovery of her crimes. The officers' attempt to move past Rosa and check on the children's welfare triggered a physical altercation that ended with Rosa being restrained and arrested on the spot. Ethan heard the commotion above them escalate rapidly, with Rosa's voice becoming increasingly shrill and desperate as she realized that her world was collapsing around her. the sound of the struggle, followed by the distinctive click of handcuffs, being applied, marked the end of Rosa's reign of terror over the Rodriguez household. Patricia's voice in Ethan's ear confirmed what he had already begun to suspect. Rosa was in police custody, the immediate danger was over, and it was now safe for him to bring Sofia upstairs to meet the officers and paramedics who had come to help them. The climb up the basement stairs represented a journey from darkness into light in both literal and metaphorical terms. Sofia clung to Ethan throughout the ascent, her small fingers wrapped tightly around his shirt, as if afraid that returning to the main house might somehow separate them again. But when they emerged into the kitchen, they found not Rosa's threatening presence, but rather a team of professionals dedicated to their safety and welfare. Sergeant Gonzalez's first sight of the two children, with Sofia clearly showing signs of neglect and abuse, while Ethan displayed the protective maturity of someone forced to grow up too quickly, confirmed everything she needed to know about the validity of the emergency call. In the breakthrough, the arrival of paramedics transformed the Rodriguez kitchen into a mobile medical station focused entirely on assessing and treating Sofia's condition after her ordeal in the basement. Lead paramedic James Thompson had seen numerous cases of child abuse during his career, but the sight of 18-month-old Sofia Rodriguez clinging desperately to her 7-year-old brother while showing obvious signs of dehydration and psychological trauma affected him more deeply than he had expected. His partner, Sarah Kim, immediately began preparing the equipment needed to properly evaluate Sofia's physical condition while maintaining the gentle, non-threatening demeanor essential when working with traumatized children. Sofia's initial reaction to the strangers in uniform was predictable terror, her small body pressing against Ethan's as she tried to hide from these new adults who might pose additional threats to her safety. But Ethan's calm voice, explaining that these people were there to help, combined with Patricia's continued guidance through the phone, gradually helped Sofia understand that she was finally safe. The process of medical evaluation required infinite patience as the paramedics worked around Sofia's fear, using games and gentle distraction techniques to assess her vital signs and check for injuries. The physical evidence of Rosa's neglect was undeniable and heartbreaking. Sofia was significantly dehydrated, her lips dry and her skin showing the telltale signs of fluid loss that indicated she had been without adequate water for far too long. Her weight appeared to be below normal ranges for her age, suggesting that the nutritional neglect had been ongoing for weeks or possibly months, rather than just during the basement imprisonment. Most concerning of all were the signs of psychological trauma. The way she startled at sudden movements, her reluctance to let go of Ethan even for medical examination, and the absence of the normal curiosity and responsiveness typical of healthy toddlers her age. Dr. Amanda Chen arrived at the house within minutes of being called by the paramedics, her expertise in pediatric emergency medicine making her the ideal professional to coordinate Sofia's care during this critical transition. From abuse to safety, her first assessment confirmed the paramedics' initial findings while revealing additional concerns about the long-term effects of Sofia's traumatic experience. The combination of physical neglect, psychological abuse, and social isolation could have devastating impacts on a child so young, but Dr. Chen was optimistic that with proper treatment and a stable, loving environment, Sofia could make a full recovery. Ethan's role as Sofia's primary source of comfort during the medical evaluation revealed the depth of the bond that had sustained both children through their ordeal. Even trained professionals with years of experience working with traumatized Children were moved by the sight of the 7-year-old boy carefully explaining each medical procedure to his sister, translating the doctor's reassurances into language she could understand, and providing the emotional support that allowed Sofia to accept the help she desperately needed. His maturity and selflessness were remarkable, but they also represented a childhood cut short by circumstances no child should ever face. Mrs. Betty Johnson's arrival at the scene brought additional emotional support and community validation for the children's experience. The elderly neighbor's shock and horror at learning what had been happening next door, combined with her immediate offers to help in any way possible, demonstrated the power of community connections in protecting vulnerable children. Her presence also provided crucial context about the family's normal dynamics, helping investigators understand that Rosa's abuse represented a dramatic departure from the loving, stable home environment Miguel had worked so hard to create for his children. The coordination between multiple agencies during the initial response phase showcased the child protection system working exactly as it was designed to function. Child Protective Services caseworker Linda Martinez arrived to begin the process of documenting the abuse and ensuring the children's ongoing safety, while Detective Robert Hayes started collecting evidence that would be crucial for prosecuting Rosa's crimes. Each professional brought specific expertise to address different aspects of the children's needs, but all were united in their commitment to ensuring that Ethan and Sofia would never again be placed in such danger. The phone call to Miguel at his workplace marked another crucial turning point in the family's journey toward healing. Sergeant Gonzalez's careful explanation of the situation, emphasizing that both children were safe, but that serious abuse had occurred, initially left Miguel struggling to comprehend how such horror could have unfolded in his own home. His immediate decision to close the garage and rush home, despite the financial impact of leaving work during a crucial weekend, demonstrated the priorities that would guide the family's recovery process. Miguel's arrival at the house 30 minutes after the initial police response brought the final piece of the family puzzle together, but it also marked the beginning of his own difficult journey toward understanding and healing. The sight of his children surrounded by emergency responders, with Sofia clearly showing signs of serious neglect and Ethan displaying a maturity that spoke of trauma survived, forced Miguel to confront the reality that his trust in Rosa had nearly cost him everything he held dear. His immediate focus on comforting his children and ensuring their welfare, combined with his visible anguish at realizing how close he had come to losing Sofia, revealed the depth of his love and his commitment to being the father they needed. The decision to transport Sofia to Riverside General Hospital for comprehensive medical evaluation and treatment represented a crucial step in her physical recovery. But it also required careful attention to maintaining her emotional connection with Ethan. Dr. Chen's recommendation that Ethan accompany his sister to the hospital recognized the therapeutic value of their bond, while ensuring that Sofia would have familiar comfort available during additional medical procedures. The sight of the two children in the back of the ambulance, with Ethan holding Sofia's hand while paramedics monitored her condition, symbolized both the trauma they had endured and the resilience that would carry them forward. The reckoning. The investigation into Rosa Martinez's systematic abuse of Sofia Rodriguez unfolded with methodical precision as Detective Hayes and his team gathered evidence from multiple sources to build a comprehensive case against the woman who had betrayed a family's trust in the most horrific way possible. The physical evidence from the basement told a clear story of deliberate confinement and neglect, with the makeshift prison Rosa had created for Sofia serving as undeniable proof of her crimes. But beyond the physical evidence lay a more complex web of psychological manipulation and community deception that revealed the calculated nature of Rosa's abuse. Rosa's initial attempts to claim innocence crumbled quickly under professional interrogation, her story changing multiple times as investigators presented evidence that contradicted her explanations. Her first claim that Sofia had locked herself in the basement accidentally was immediately disproven by the external lock mechanism that required adult operation. Her second story, that Sofia had been placed in the basement for brief timeouts that had somehow been misunderstood, fell apart when medical evidence revealed the extent of the child's dehydration and the duration of her confinement. Each lie exposed led to additional questions that Rosa couldn't answer convincingly, ultimately forcing her to face the reality that her crimes had been thoroughly documented. The charges filed against Rosa reflected the severity of her crimes and the vulnerability of her victims. Child endangerment, aggravated child abuse, false imprisonment, and criminal neglect were just the beginning of the legal consequences she would face. The district attorney's office, led by prosecutor Jennifer Walsh, made it clear that they would pursue the maximum penalties available under state law. Recognizing that Rosa's systematic abuse of an 18-month-old child represented one of the most serious forms of criminal behavior their jurisdiction encountered. Miguel's cooperation with the investigation was complete and heartbreaking, as he provided investigators with detailed information about Rosa's employment, her interactions with the children, and the subtle signs he now realized he had missed or misinterpreted during the months of abuse. His guilt over failing to protect his children was evident in every conversation with investigators, but his commitment to ensuring Rosa faced full legal consequences was unwavering. The financial records showing Rosa's payments, combined with witness statements from neighbors and Miguel's co-workers who had recommended her services, painted a picture of a woman who had systematically deceived an entire community while torturing a helpless child. The media attention surrounding Rosa's arrest brought additional scrutiny to the case, while also raising important questions about background check procedures for childcare providers and the warning signs of abuse that communities needed to recognize. Local news coverage focused on Ethan's heroic actions in saving his sister, but also highlighted the systematic failures that had allowed Rosa's abuse to continue undetected for months. The story resonated with parents throughout the region, many of whom began re-evaluating their own childcare arrangements and questioning whether they truly knew the people they trusted with their children's welfare. Rosa's eventual guilty plea came after her defense attorney explained that the evidence against her was overwhelming and that a trial would likely result in even harsher sentences. Her admission of guilt to multiple felony charges related to child abuse brought some measure of closure to the Rodriguez family, though the healing process would require much more than legal resolution. The 25-year prison sentence she received reflected both the severity of her crimes and the judge's recognition that her actions had permanently altered the lives of two innocent children. The civil lawsuit filed against Rosa by Miguel's attorney sought financial compensation for Sofia's medical expenses, ongoing therapy costs, and the long-term impacts of her traumatic experience. While Rosa's limited financial resources meant that significant monetary recovery was unlikely, the lawsuit served important symbolic purposes in holding her accountable for all dimensions of the harm she had caused. The legal system's comprehensive response to Rosa's crimes sent a clear message to the community about the absolute unacceptability of child abuse and the serious consequences faced by those who harm vulnerable children. The testimony provided by Dr. Chen and other medical professionals during Rosa's sentencing hearing detailed the long-term impacts that Sofia's abuse could have on her development, emotional regulation, and ability to form trusting relationships with caregivers. Their expert opinions helped the court understand that Rosa's crimes extended far beyond the immediate physical harm she had caused, potentially affecting Sofia's entire future in ways that might not become fully apparent for years. This comprehensive understanding of abuse's long-term consequences influenced the judge's decision to impose the maximum allowable sentence. The transformation. 6 months after Rosa's arrest, the Rodriguez family had begun the slow but steady process of rebuilding their lives around healing, trust, and the kind of protective love that would ensure nothing like their nightmare could ever happen again. Miguel's decision to reduce his working hours and take a position closer to home reflected his understanding that being physically present in his children's lives was more important than any amount of overtime pay. The financial adjustment was significant, but the peace of mind that came from knowing exactly who was caring for his children at every moment made the sacrifice worthwhile. Sofia's recovery had been remarkable in many ways, though traces of her traumatic experience remained visible to those who knew what to look for. Regular therapy sessions with Dr. Rebecca Santos, a specialist in childhood trauma, had helped Sofia process her experiences in age-appropriate ways, while developing coping strategies for the anxiety and fear that occasionally surfaced. Her vocabulary had expanded dramatically as she learned to express her feelings and needs verbally, rather than through the desperate crying that had once been her only means of communication. The bond between Ethan and Sofia had evolved from the desperate protectiveness born of crisis into something healthier and more sustainable, though their connection remained extraordinarily strong. Ethan's own therapy sessions had focused on helping him understand that while his actions had saved his sister's life, he shouldn't have to carry adult responsibilities for her safety and well-being. Learning to be a normal 7-year-old brother rather than a substitute parent had been challenging, but it was essential for his own healthy development. Miguel's relationship with both children had deepened through their shared experience of trauma and recovery, though it was also complicated by his ongoing guilt over failing to recognize Rosa's abuse earlier. Family therapy sessions had helped. All three of them communicate more openly about their feelings, fears, and hopes for the future. The process had revealed strengths in their family bonds that Miguel hadn't fully appreciated before the crisis, while also identifying areas where they needed to continue growing and healing together. The community's response to the Rodriguez family's ordeal had been overwhelmingly supportive, with neighbors, co-workers, and even strangers offering assistance in numerous ways. Mrs. Johnson had become an unofficial grandmother figure, providing childcare when needed and serving as an additional set of watchful eyes to ensure the children's safety. Local businesses had donated money for Sofia's medical expenses, while other families had shared resources and emotional support during the most difficult phases of recovery. The changes in the Rodriguez household extended beyond emotional healing to practical safety measures that reflected their new understanding of vulnerability and protection. A security system with cameras allowed Miguel to monitor his home remotely when necessary, while carefully vetted backup childcare providers ensured that the children would never again be left with someone whose background hadn't been thoroughly investigated. These measures provided peace of mind while also serving as visible reminders of the vigilance required to protect precious things. Ethan's recognition as a local hero had brought attention that he found both gratifying and overwhelming, with community organizations presenting him with awards for courage and local media featuring his story as an example of remarkable bravery. But perhaps more meaningful than public recognition was the quiet pride he felt in knowing that his actions had made the difference between his sister's survival and a tragedy that would have destroyed their family forever. His sense of self-worth, once entirely tied to his ability to care for Sofia, had expanded to include pride in his academic achievements, friendships with other children, and normal 7-year-old interests. Sofia's development had accelerated rapidly once she was removed from the traumatic environment and provided with consistent, loving care. Her language skills, social responsiveness, and physical coordination had all improved dramatically, suggesting that while Rosa's abuse had caused significant harm, it hadn't permanently damaged Sofia's potential for normal development. Her laughter had returned first as tentative giggles, then as the full-bodied joy that had characterized her personality before Rosa entered their lives. The family's participation in support groups for abuse survivors had connected them with other families who had faced similar challenges, providing both practical advice and emotional validation for their experiences. These connections had helped Miguel understand that his feelings of guilt and failure were normal responses to discovering that his children had been harmed under his watch, while also showing him examples of families who had successfully rebuilt their lives after trauma. As the 1-year anniversary of Rosa's arrest approached, the Rodriguez family could look back on their journey with a mixture of pain and pride. The pain came from knowing what Sofia had endured and recognizing how close they had come to losing her entirely. The pride came from seeing how they had faced their crisis together, how they had refused to let Rosa's cruelty destroy their love for each other, and how they had built something stronger and more resilient from the broken pieces of their former life. Miguel's decision to share their story publicly, despite the privacy concerns and painful memories it would involve, reflected his commitment to preventing other families from experiencing similar tragedies. His testimony before the state legislature about the need for stronger background check requirements for childcare providers had contributed to new laws that would make it harder for people like Rosa to gain access to vulnerable children. The knowledge that their suffering might protect the families provided additional meaning to their experience and helped transform their trauma into a force for positive change. The final transformation came in the form of a new addition to their family, a golden retriever puppy named Hero, whose presence brought joy and healing energy to their home, while also serving as an additional layer of security and companionship for the children. Sofia's delight in caring for Hero, combined with Ethan's pride in teaching the puppy new tricks, represented the return of childhood innocence and play that had been stolen by Rosa's abuse, but could ultimately be reclaimed through love, patience, and time. On quiet evenings when Miguel watched his children playing together in their backyard, with Sofia's laughter mixing with Ethan's patient instruction and Hero's playful barking, he could see glimpses of the family they were becoming, stronger than before, more aware of both danger and beauty, and absolutely committed to protecting the love they had nearly lost. The scars would always remain, but they had become part of a larger story about survival, courage, and the unbreakable bonds that can sustain families through their darkest hours and carry them toward brighter tomorrows. 2 years had passed since that sweltering August day when 7-year-old Ethan Rodriguez made the most important phone call of his life, and the changes in the Rodriguez family were visible in ways both profound and subtle. The small ranch house on Maple Street had been transformed from a place of hidden suffering into a genuine sanctuary where laughter echoed through rooms that had once witnessed unthinkable cruelty. Every corner of their home now told a story of recovery, resilience, and the kind of deep family bonds that could survive even the most devastating betrayals of trust. Sofia, now 3.5 years old, bore little physical resemblance to the terrified, undernourished toddler who had been rescued from Rosa's basement prison. Her golden curls bounced with energy as she chased Hero, their golden retriever, through the backyard that Miguel had transformed into a child's paradise, complete with a swing-set, sandbox, and vegetable garden, where Sofia delighted in helping to grow tomatoes and sunflowers. Her vocabulary had exploded beyond what anyone might have expected, filled with questions, observations, and the kind of innocent wonder that marked a childhood reclaimed from the brink of permanent damage. The transformation in Sofia's emotional development had been equally remarkable, though traces of her traumatic experience occasionally surfaced in ways that reminded the family how close they had come to losing her entirely. Thunderstorms still caused her anxiety, the sound of heavy rain triggering memories she couldn't fully articulate, but that her body remembered with startling clarity. Basement doors in other people's homes made her clingy and fearful, requiring patient explanation and comfort from Miguel or Ethan before she could relax. But these moments of triggered fear were becoming less frequent and less intense as Sofia's sense of safety and security continued to strengthen with each passing month. Dr. Rebecca Santos had become more than just Sofia's therapist. She had evolved into a trusted family advisor whose expertise in childhood trauma had guided the Rodriguez family through the complex process of healing while maintaining hope for the future. Her assessment of Sofia's progress consistently emphasized the remarkable resilience that young children could demonstrate when provided with consistent love, security, and professional support. The combination of play therapy, family counseling, and careful attention to Sofia's developmental needs had created an environment where healing could occur naturally rather than being forced or rushed. Ethan, now 9 years old, had grown both physically and emotionally in ways that reflected his journey from crisis to recovery. The hypervigilant child who had once carried impossible burdens on his small shoulders had gradually learned to trust that the adults in his life were now truly capable of keeping his family safe. His academic performance had improved dramatically once he was no longer consumed with worry about Sofia's welfare, and his teachers frequently commented on his maturity, empathy, and natural leadership abilities that set him apart from his peers in positive ways. The relationship between Ethan and Sofia had evolved into something that reflected both their shared traumatic experience and the normal sibling dynamics that had been able to develop once the crisis had passed. They still shared a special bond that was evident to anyone who observed them together, but it was no longer the desperate protective connection born of life-threatening circumstances. Ethan could now enjoy being a regular big brother, teaching Sofia to ride her tricycle, helping her with puzzles, and occasionally engaging in the kind of silly sibling squabbles that marked healthy family relationships. Miguel's transformation had been perhaps the most complex of all, as he had needed to process not only his children's trauma, but also his own guilt, anger, and determination to ensure that nothing like Rosa's abuse could ever threaten his family again. His decision to leave the demanding world of automotive repair and transition into a teaching position at the local community college had provided both financial stability and a schedule that allowed him to be present for his children in ways that had been impossible during his previous career. The pay was lower, but the peace of mind was invaluable. The family's involvement in advocacy work had become an unexpected but meaningful dimension of their recovery process. Miguel's testimony before state legislative committees about the need for stronger oversight of childcare providers had contributed to the passage of new laws requiring more comprehensive background checks and regular inspections of home-based care facilities. His willingness to share their story publicly, despite the painful memories it evoked, had helped other families recognize warning signs of abuse and had encouraged survivors to speak out about their own experiences. Ethan's recognition as a youth advocate had brought opportunities to speak at schools and community events about the importance of trusting instincts, seeking help when needed, and never giving up hope even in the darkest circumstances. His natural ability to connect with other children, combined with his authentic experience of overcoming seemingly impossible challenges, made him an effective messenger for child safety initiatives. The confidence he had gained through these public speaking experiences had also helped him develop leadership skills that were evident in his school activities and friendships. The extended family and community support that had surrounded the Rodriguez family during their crisis had evolved into lasting relationships that enriched their daily lives in countless ways. Mrs. Betty Johnson had officially become an honorary grandmother, providing childcare when needed and serving as a bridge between the family and the broader neighborhood community. Her presence at family dinners, holiday celebrations, and Sofia's preschool events had helped create the kind of extended family network that provided both practical support and emotional connection. The financial assistance that had poured in from community members during the immediate aftermath of Rosa's arrest had been carefully managed to ensure Sofia's ongoing therapy needs would be met regardless of insurance limitations. A trust fund established by local businesses and anonymous donors had grown to provide not only for current medical expenses, but also for future educational opportunities and any additional therapeutic services the children might need as they continued to mature and process their experiences. The security measures that Miguel had implemented throughout their home had become so integrated into their daily routine that they no longer felt like responses to trauma, but simply practical aspects of responsible parenting. The monitoring system that allowed him to check on his children remotely had provided peace of mind during the transition back to normal work schedules, while the carefully vetted network of backup caregivers ensured that Sofia and Ethan would never again be left with someone whose background hadn't been thoroughly investigated by multiple sources. Hero, their golden retriever, had become far more than a pet. He had evolved into a therapeutic companion whose presence provided comfort during difficult moments and joy during celebrations. Sofia's relationship with Hero had been particularly healing, as caring for the dog had helped her develop nurturing instincts and confidence in her ability to provide comfort to others. Ethan's training of Hero had given him an outlet for his natural leadership abilities, while also providing a sense of accomplishment that wasn't tied to protecting others from harm. The ripple effects of their story had extended far beyond their immediate community, with child advocacy organizations using their experience as a case study in the importance of listening to children's concerns and taking reports of abuse seriously, regardless of the apparent credibility of the accused caregiver. Rosa's systematic deception and the months during which her abuse went undetected had highlighted significant gaps in the systems designed to protect vulnerable children, leading to policy changes that would benefit countless families in the future. The legal resolution of Rosa's case had provided important closure while also serving as a deterrent to others who might consider exploiting positions of trust to harm children. Her 25-year prison sentence ensured that she would never again have access to vulnerable children, while the publicity surrounding her conviction had raised awareness about the warning signs of abuse that community members needed to recognize. The civil judgment against Rosa, while limited by her financial resources, had established important legal precedents about the liability of individuals who abused children in their care. Sofia's preschool experience had been carefully chosen to provide not only quality early childhood education, but also an environment where her unique needs could be understood and accommodated. Her teachers had been briefed on her background in age-appropriate terms, allowing them to provide additional support when needed, while also ensuring that she could participate fully in normal childhood activities. Her social development with peers had been remarkable, as she had learned to form friendships and engage in group activities without the fearfulness that had initially characterized her interactions with unfamiliar adults. The anniversary of Rose's arrest had become an annual family celebration that honored their survival while also acknowledging the ongoing nature of their healing journey. Rather than dwelling on the trauma they had endured, they focused on the strength they had discovered, the love that had sustained them, and the hope that continued to guide their future. These anniversary celebrations included visits to the police station to thank the officers who had responded to Ethan's call, donations to child advocacy organizations, and quiet family time, reflecting on how far they had traveled from their darkest hours. Miguel's relationship with both of his children had deepened through their shared experience of trauma and recovery, creating bonds that were stronger than those in many families who had never faced such challenges. His understanding of childhood development had expanded through the therapy process, making him more attuned to his children's emotional needs and more skilled at providing the kind of support that promoted healthy growth. The guilt he had initially felt about failing to protect them had been transformed into a determination to be the father they deserved for the rest of their lives. The broader community's response to their story had created lasting changes in how childcare providers were screened and monitored throughout their region. Multiple childcare facilities had implemented new safety protocols directly inspired by the Rodriguez family's experience, while parent education programs now included specific training on recognizing signs of abuse and responding appropriately to children's reports of mistreatment. These systemic changes represented perhaps the most meaningful legacy of their traumatic experience. Ethan's academic interests had expanded to include psychology and social work, fields that would allow him to help other children facing challenges similar to those he had overcome. His teachers had noted his unusual empathy and maturity when working with struggling classmates, qualities that suggested a natural aptitude for helping others navigate difficult circumstances. While he was still only 9 years old, his early interest in careers focused on child welfare suggested that his traumatic experience might ultimately be transformed into a lifelong commitment to protecting vulnerable children. The family's financial situation had stabilized in ways that provided security without the stress that had initially made Miguel vulnerable to Rosa's deception. His teaching position provided both steady income and meaningful work, while the community support they had received had eliminated the medical debt that might otherwise have burdened them for years. The trust fund established for Sofia's ongoing needs had removed the financial pressure that might have forced Miguel to accept less than ideal childcare arrangements in the future. Sofia's artistic abilities had emerged as another positive aspect of her recovery, with her drawings and paintings providing windows into her emotional state, while also serving as outlets for expression that complemented her verbal therapy. Her artwork had evolved from the dark, chaotic images that had initially concerned her therapists to bright, hopeful depictions of family life, friendship, and the natural world. The progression of her artistic development paralleled her emotional, healing in ways that provided both evidence of progress and hope for continued growth. The support group connections that had been so crucial during the initial phases of their recovery had evolved into lasting friendships with other families who had faced similar challenges. These relationships provided ongoing emotional support, while also creating a network of families who understood the unique dynamics of recovering from childhood trauma. The children in these families had formed their own friendships, creating peer support systems that complemented the professional, therapeutic services they received. As Miguel watched Sofia playing in their backyard on a warm spring evening, her laughter mixing with Hero's happy barking while Ethan taught her to properly throw a frisbee, He could see not only how far they had traveled from their darkest hours, but also the bright future that stretched ahead of them. The scars would always remain, both visible and hidden, but they had become part of a larger story about the power of love to overcome hatred, the strength of family bonds to survive betrayal, and the resilience of children to heal even from the most devastating experiences. The phone call that Ethan had made on that desperate August day had saved more than Sofia's life. It had preserved their family, inspired their community, and created ripple effects that would protect countless other children for years to come. The courage of a 7-year-old boy had become a legacy of hope that would continue to influence lives long after the immediate crisis had faded into memory. In the end, love had triumphed over cruelty, truth had conquered deception, and a family had emerged stronger from their greatest test. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.